Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we transform complex source material into clarity, insight, and hopefully those crucial aha moments.
I hope so.
Today, we're embarking on what I can only describe as a communication autopsy.
That's a good word for it.
We are wading into the digital trenches to look at the anatomy of an absolute failure. I mean, a complete and utter breakdown of intellectual disagreement online.
That's right. Our source material today is it's extraordinary precisely because of it's a highly subjective firsthand account from one participant in a hostile online exchange.
Very hostile, it seems.
It really meticulously chronicles how a conversation, which was rooted in literary criticism, just devolved into aggressive personal hostility and eventually the imposition of the broad ideological labels.
Okay, so the initial sparks, they flew over discussions about an author, Alex Aster, and a male character in her work named Zayden. Right. The argument was all about critiques, claims of stereotyping, and questions of the author's identity, specifically her sexuality. But here's our mission statement for this deep dive, and it's critical. We are not here to judge the quality of the literary critique itself. We are analyzing the way the critique was delivered.
The methods.
Exactly. The methods of evasion that were employed and the subsequent character judgments that were made because of those methods.
We are looking at the mechanics of communication failure when two worldviews just clash. The interaction involved an individual named Julian Greystoke, and the source writer's account is, it's a master document.
It really is.
It details every perceived condescension, every refusal to clarify, and every single moment of what they viewed as bad faith.
Okay, let's unpack this because the source material, it provides a checklist of behaviors that are unfortunately so common in these polarized online spaces.
All too common.
We're going to cover everything from the immediate use of insider sort of gatekeeping language.
The dreaded acronym.
All the way to outright mockery, the weaponization of emojis, and then finally, this bizarre introduction of pet ownership, claims that the source writer uses to question the other party's grounding in reality. It's a wild ride.
It's a complex and frankly a pretty depressing picture. It illustrates perfectly how quickly any kind of substantive critical exchange dissolves when one party feels dismissed or even worse, bullied.
Right.
Our focus here is on that tactical and emotional, the move from simple intellectual disagreement to a sustained attempt to assert superiority and just destroy the opponent's credibility.
Let's begin then with what the source writer insists were genuine attempts at intellectual engagement.
The olive branch, so to speak.
Exactly. They framed their initial comments not as an attack, but as an attempt at clarification. They had two very specific questions that they posed to Julian Greystoke.
And these questions centered squarely on the core points Julian was making about the literature. They weren't out of left.
No, not at all. And these questions, they were really designed to hold Julian Greystoke accountable to her own analysis, which is, that's a key component of any good debate, right?
Absolutely. You have to be able to defend your claim. The source writer wanted specific. First, why Julian believed the male character, Zayden, was a stereotype of straight white men.
Okay, so question one.
Fine, you're exact. And second, why Julian was so focused on whether the author, Alex Aster, was straight.
So question two, justify your focus. Why does this particular identity marker matter so much to your critique?
Precisely.
Those questions are the anchors of rational debate, aren't they? They're attempts to compel the speaker to define their terms, justify their focus on identity, and explain the why behind their claims.
The source writer was trying to ground the discussion in something concrete, in definitions. But based on their account, Julian Greystoke interpreted this request for clarification as something else.
As something hostile.
Yes, the perception of dismissal was instant, and according to the writer, severe. The source writer recounts that Julian treated them dismissively right away and felt the interaction immediately morph bullying.
And that emotional response is so critical here. The source writer perceived that Julian acted as if the very presence of the comment, this, honest request for clarification, was some kind of joke.
Like, how dare you even ask?
Exactly. That is the crucial breakdown moment that sets the trajectory for the entire exchange. When you pose what you believe is a good faith question, and the person on the other end reacts with what you perceive as mockery or dismissal, the subject matter suddenly becomes secondary.
It really does.
The conversation shifts from what are we talking about to what is our power dynamic here?
Precisely. The source writer felt Julian refused to engage in good faith, opting instead for what they termed a smug attitude. And we have to dwell on that. Smugness.
It's such a loaded word.
It is, because it signals an implicit assertion of status. When someone approaches a dialogue with perceived smugness, they're signaling that they believe the other person is, I don't know, beneath them, fundamentally ignorant, or just not worthy of a serious, logically structured response.
And this inherent assertion of superior status, that brings us immediately to the first tactical provocation that the source highlights.
The insider language.
The acronym, and the deliberate refusal to explain it.
Right. Julian's initial reply was simply to write "eek" without any further context. As many of our listeners will know, that stands for if you know, you know.
And as a communication tactic, it's just inherently exclusionary, isn't it?
Oh, completely. It serves as an instant knowledge barrier. It's the digital equivalent of an intellectual bouncer at a club door.
That's a great way to put it. It suggests there is this shared, implicit, non-negotiable understanding that the source writer is explicitly not privy.
By using it, Julian instantly signaled that the source writer's question was either too obvious for the enlightened group to even bother with, or maybe too complex for the source writer to possibly grasp.
Either way, it renders their critique irrelevant before it's even heard.
And here's where the source writer, according to their account, tried repeatedly to de-escalate and revert to good. They repeatedly asked for clarification.
They made it crystal clear.
Unequivocally clear they didn't know what it meant. It's an open declaration fusion, just asking for a bridge.
But Julian's follow-up was evasive, and crucially, it was perceived as deliberate.
Varied.
Instead of simply defining the four-letter acronym, which would take, 5 seconds or the dialogue, she responded only with a winking emoji.
That emoji is so potent. The source writer interpreted that specific winking face as Julian deliberately playing games.
And you can see why.
Absolutely. This confirms the source writer's suspicion that the refusal to explain wasn't due to laziness or being busy, but was an intentional attack, a form of provocation designed to frustrate and assert intellectual superiority.
This moves the whole conversation into this really interesting area of rhetorical strategy. If we look at the iykyk as tactic, it functions as a form of rhetorical inoculation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Julian is essentially protecting her original literary claim, the one about Xaden being a stereotype, by building a social barrier around it. She doesn't have to defend the premise if she can successfully assert that the challenger is too low status or too uninitiated to even understand the debate's terms.
That's a powerful distinction. You're not debating the idea anymore.
No. You're debating the person's right to even have the debate.
And when one party is actively trying to clarify their confusion and the other is responding with what are perceived as passive-aggressive signals, a smug tone, an inside joke, a winking emoji, the substance of Xaden's characterization just ceases to matter.
It's gone.
The argument has fundamentally morphed into a conflict over respect, status, and power dynamics. The debate is no longer about the book. It is about who has the right to speak on the topic.
But wait, if we're really analyzing the dynamics here, we have to ask, is it possible the source writer is overreacting, or are they a reliable narrator for this communication failure?
That's an excellent point for us to consider because it speaks to the challenge of decoding intent.
Right. Tone is so hard to read.
It is. If the conversation had started cordially, the iykyk might be interpreted as, just a casual shorthand or even a slightly annoying but benign dismissal.
Maybe just laziness.
Exactly. However, because the source writer immediately felt that smug attitude and dismissiveness, the acronym is then read through a lens of confirmed hostility. It becomes less about the message and more about the messenger's perceived intent.
So the context of that first perceived slight colors everything that follows.
Yes. The context provided by the source writer suggests this was received as the first deliberate strike against good.
So once that interaction is poisoned by the perceived smugness, every subsequent ambiguous action like the winking emoji is automatically assigned the most hostile interpretation possible. The door to good faith just slams shut.
And it seems like he was bolted from the other side.
Okay, so here's where it gets analytically robust, because the communication tactics employed become even more overtly aggressive and targeted.
We move past subtle.
Way past. We move from simple evasion to active, sustained mockery, which the source writer clearly identifies as intentional hostility and really an escalating attack.
The dynamic changes completely once the source writer, who's been denied any explanation, is forced to become their own resource.
Which is already a frustrating position to be in.
Very. After the repeated refusals and the winking emoji games, the source writer finally searches for the acronym iykyk independently. They successfully bridge the knowledge gap that Julian had, intentionally created.
And what was Julian's reaction to this moment of the source writer finally achieving basic clarity? Was it engagement? Was it, oh, sorry, now we can talk?
Not quite.
No. It was a further, deeper layer of mock. Julian Greystoke reportedly responded by saying, "She was glad I finally researched something."
We have to analyze that specific quote because it is just a masterclass in tactical condescension.
It's incredible.
Julian was perceived as creating a knowledge barrier, then mocking the source writer for not knowing, and then mocking them again for successfully overcoming the barrier she herself put up.
And the source writer highlights the profound hypocrisy here. Julian was mocking them for needing to do research.
Despite the fact that Julian had never actually answered the original substantive question about the book critique in the first place, she never explained why Xaden was a stereotype.
It's an intentional, tactical escalation designed to shame. It confirms the source writer's belief that Julian was deliberately avoiding providing straightforward answers simply to establish and reinforce her own intellectual dominance.
The true goal shifts entirely. It's no longer about defending a literary opinion. It's about humiliating the challenge.
And this behavior is labeled in the source material as an intentional provocation.
Yes, and it's critical for you, the listener, to understand that this exchange moved beyond a mere difference of opinion. It escalated into a targeted interpersonal conflict. It became focused on attacking the other person's competence and their willingness to participate in a specific social or intellectual circle.
The ultimate breakdown, however, involved the final rejection of language itself. I mean, this is where it just goes off a cliff.
It really does.
The source writer noted that the interaction fully devolved when Julian stopped responding with substantive words entirely and just resorted to strings of laughing emojis.
This is such a classic, pervasive example of nonverbal online aggression. You could almost call it weaponizing non-language.
That's a great term for it.
When the source writer pointed out how unhelpful, evasive, and childish her behavior was, Julian didn't respond with a defensive or claim or even a witty retort. She just flooded the thread with laughing emojis.
Which is a total abandonment of reasoned discourse.
And the source writer interpreted this tactical reaction in three very specific and increasingly negative ways. First, they felt it was extremely childish and disrespectful. Emojis, when used like this, are seen as the antithesis of mature, reasoned...
Second, and this is psychologically important, the source writer specified that Julian was laughing at them, not because something was genuinely fun.
That's a key distinction. The laughing emoji, which is normally a signifier of genuine amusement or lightheartedness, is actively stripped of that.
And it's repurposed.
It's repurposed as a tool for personalized aggression. It's a way of saying, your distress, your frustration is my entertainment.
And third, the source writer concluded that Julian used the sustained laughter because she seemed to enjoy dismissing and was asserting superiority through this cocktail of sarcasm, mockery, and evasiveness.
This, as the source writer saw, is passive-aggressive hostility in its purest, most frustrating.
The refusal to use words means there's no logical statement left to refute. You can't argue with a string of laughing faces.
You really can't. This tactic forces the recipient to either just accept the humiliation and walk away, or escalate extreme emotional themselves, which of course then makes them look unstable.
It's a trap.
It is. From the source writer's perspective, this just confirmed the frame of the argument. It was no longer a discussion. It was now an exercise in what they label passive-aggressive hostility.
So the compounding effect of the unexplained acronym, the winking emoji, the mocking of research, and then this final barrage of laughing emojis.
Yeah.
It all led the source writer to a very firm and very damning conclusion about Julian's capability for mature debate.
That conclusion was that Julian can't handle being challenged and is completely unwilling to engage with actual questions.
The entire trajectory, from that initial attempt to clarify Xaden's characterization all the way to this nonverbal attack, was interpreted as a sophisticated yet fundamentally immature defense mechanism.
And its function was not to win the literary argument, but to destroy the opponent's credibility and their desire to continue participating at all.
If we step back and just look at the sheer volume of tactical evasion, the acronyms, the winks, the direct mockery, the emoji string, it paints such a vivid picture of why online arguments feel so fundamentally frustrating for so many.
Because once the primary goal shifts from mutual understanding, assertion of status, every communication tool is deployed not for logic, but for dominance.
It's the moment when intellectual curiosity gets weaponized against the curious party.
That's it exactly. If you are asking clarifying questions, you are demonstrating. If you are researching answers on your own, you are confirming your lower status. There is simply no route to intellectual engagement left open by this specific style of close.
This overwhelming failure of engagement forces the source writer into a new phase of their... They didn't just walk away frustrated. They tried to categorize, contain Julian Greystoke's highly evasive and aggressive...
They reached for a framework.
Yes, they reached for broad ideological label, concluding that this specific interaction style is symptomatic of a larger, negative internet culture.
This is where we transition fully into the subjective interpretation, and it's crucial we maintain our analytical distance here. We are reporting on the source's conclusions.
Absolutely.
Since Julian Greystoke had refused to provide any rational explanations for her literary claims or her communication style, the source writer needed an explanatory framework. And that framework, in the current climate, is almost always political or ideological.
The labels used are extremely charged and specific. The source writer repeatedly characterizes Julian Greystoke's attitude and behavior as symptomatic of being extremely woke, belonging to the world of very online, hyper-politicized people, and being part of a loud ideological internet crowd.
What's fascinating here, and what we have to analyze impartially, is the immediate equation being made. The observed behavior, the hostility, the evasion, the refusal to define terms is being treated as conclusive evidence of an ideological stance.
So the how becomes the what.
Exactly. The source writer is suggesting that this dismissive communication style is a signature of a specific online group that they oppose.
So what does this behavioral shortcut tell us about the source writer's conclusion? I mean, the writer suggests this behavior mirrors that of hyper-politicized internet personalities who are defensive, mocking, and convinced of their own moral authority, even when they refuse to explain anything.
In short, bad communication equals bad ideology.
That shortcut allows the source writer to make sense of what feels like inexplicable rudeness.
Yes, if a person refuses to engage logically or clarify their basic premise, such as why Zayden is a stereotype, the conclusion reached is that they must be operating from a place of dogma.
Right, from a bubble.
Trapped in a bubble where those premises are taken for granted and anyone questioning them isn't someone to be educated, but an ideological enemy to be dismissed.
And Julian Greystoke is specifically described as being aggressively self-righteous and, consequently, trapped in her own ideological bubble. This framing connects the perceived personal hostility, the smug attitude, the winking emoji, directly to a perceived socio-political framework that the source writer finds alienating and irrational.
When logic and explanation fail, people look for context. And in the current climate, that context is so often defined by polarization and group identity. The source writer couldn't get a straight answer about the book.
So they concluded Julian's actions were driven not by honest thought, but by an unquestionable dogma that privileges insider knowledge over universal clarity. And as if to provide the final damning piece of evidence for this perceived ideological disconnection from reality, the source writer introduces a detail about Julian's personal life that is a total non sequitur to literary critique.
The ferrets.
The claim about her pets.
Yes, the source material introduces the peculiar and extreme detail that Julian Greystoke claimed her ferrets are her biological children.
And this is a profound shift in rhetorical strategy, as we have moved entirely from discussing literary critique to questioning the opponent's mental stability and their grounding in objective reality.
It's a huge pivot. We need to devote some time to analyzing the rhetorical function of this ferret claim, because it becomes the ultimate tool for character assassination and the justification for the source writer's final dismissal.
The final piece of the puzzle for them.
It is. The source writer uses this claim as immediate proof that it raises serious questions about how grounded they are. They do acknowledge that loving pets deeply is normal, but they draw a firm, analytical line at the specific language.
And the language is key.
It is. Calling them biological children is labeled as not what most emotionally balanced adults would claim.
This is a debate pivot from the specific Zayden's characterization to the universe, which is the opponent's grasp of reality.
Complete. By introducing this extreme non sequitur detail, the source writer is effectively saying, look, if this person is disconnected enough from reality to believe their ferrets are their biological children,
then their literary claims and their smug, evasive communication tactics must also be equally disconnected, irrational, and unworthy of serious consideration.
It acts as a cognitive shortcut. Once the opponent is successfully framed as fundamentally irrational, their previous actions, the iykyk, the mockery, the evasion, they're no longer seen as strategic tactics.
They're just symptoms.
They are simply symptoms of a disconnected mind. The source writer uses this detail to paint a final picture of someone whose worldview feels disconnected, to say the least.
In rhetorical terms, this is the ultimate move to disqualify the opponent entirely. It shifts the argument from Julian is wrong to Julian is incompetent to even engage in the argument.
And it's the final piece of evidence used to justify the source writer's final severe If Julian is willing to assert something objectively irrational, as the writers, then the source writer feels empowered to dismiss every single one of Julian's claims, literary, social, and ideological, as equally ungrounded, self-righteous, and immature.
So if we synthesize this entire impression given to the source writer, the result is a person who is deeply immature, aggressively self-righteous, and ultimately, in the source writer's own view, insane.
We have to pause here to emphasize that insane is the highly subjective and extreme conclusion reached by the source writer. It reflects the endpoint of their protracted frustration.
It's the final rhetorical hammer drop.
It is. It's concluding that the person who started this discussion about a fictional male character is not merely wrong, but completely disqualified from rational participation.
This entire account, from that very first simple question to the ferret claim, it serves as an incredibly detailed record of how effortlessly online intellectual curiosity can spiral into the gutter.
It really does.
Especially when one person prioritizes asserting status and superiority over basic, good faith engagement and clarification. The tactics employed effectively transformed a critique of a book into a profound, personal crisis of communication.
And this detailed account serves as a powerful cautionary tale for anyone engaging online. If you use communication methods designed to frustrate, exclude, and mock, the insider acronyms, the winking emojis, the refusal to clarify basic terms, you really shouldn't be surprised when your opponent resorts to broad ideological dismissal or, in this case, questioning your fundamental grasp of reality.
So this deep dive has shown us something crucial: the incredible speed at which online discourse can dissolve when fundamental intentions clash.
The speed is breathtaking.
The source material provided a surgical look at what happens when one party, Julian Greystoke, feels challenged and responds with these layered tactics of evasion and mockery instead of just.
And that, in turn, leads the challenger to reach for broad, often derogatory, ideological labels to explain the hostility they're experiencing.
That is the key takeaway for you, the learner, today. The substance of the debate, whether Xaden is a stereotype or how relevant Alex Aster's sexuality, it became utterly meaningless.
Completely irrelevant. It was completely overshadowed by the difficulty of maintaining a rational dialogue when one participant used strategies designed purely to assert intellectual superiority and gatekeep the conversation.
Whether it was using a secret acronym like iykyk or the deployment of sustained strings of laughing emojis, these methods functioned exclusively as buried, not bridged.
They were deployed to dismiss the challenger and to remove the necessity of addressing the act. Source writer's conclusion was direct. Julian was completely unwilling to engage with actual questions.
And that inability or unwillingness to engage, to simply clarify basic premises, is what we've seen turn what should have been an intellectual disagreement into a hostile personal encounter that ends with one party calling the other insane based on their pet ownership claim.
The method of communication became the entirety of...
It really did. And it raises a profound question about the nature of online conflict. And it's something for you to mull over. If someone consistently uses highly dismissive, evasive communication tactic, the smug attitude, the refusal to clarify, the mocking laughter, regardless of their actual political or ideological standing, does the method of communication itself become the primary ideological marker for those receiving the message?
That's a fascinating question.
Does being identified as hyper-politicized simply become synonymous with being intentionally evasive, condescending, and, well, rude?
The sources here suggest that for the frustrated participant, these methods of communication, they become the stand-in for the ideology itself. They are the visible symptoms of the bubble.
Food for thought the next time you decide whether to define an acronym or just send a winking emoji. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.